Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going to be looking at what was probably the deadliest workplace disaster in New York City prior to 9/11, and that was the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in the year 1911. And Chris, when you research, when you teach, I've taught this multiple times. I'm sure you have as well. When you teach the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory disaster, when you read about it and research it, it's eerily familiar to 9/11 in a lot of ways.
It is. And I think it's also one of those things in which we would probably say that would happen in a country not such as the United States of America. Regardless of the time period, you just don't think that we are that brazen enough to do what happened, to the mostly women who are immigrants. I mean, Ray, this is a tragedy that definitely could have been prevented. It could have been avoided, but the almighty dollar is what was driving this whole process. And it really is a sad thing, to the point where pretty much any history student today, when you mention the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, their next word kind of goes, oh, wasn't that the fire that destroyed all of those individuals who were basically working for nothing? And the reality is that's true.
Yeah. And I mean, it was absolutely terrible. What's going to happen here is, and you mentioned the fact it's preventable. This is 100% preventable. And it wasn't just negligence, though it was that. It was also, as we will see, just outright what we would today call criminal behavior that brought about this fire. Now, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was in New York City. It was on the corner of Green and Washington Street there in New York City. It was located in the top 3 floors of the Ash building there in New York City. And the factory itself was owned by a guy called Max Black and Isaac Harris. These two men owned this factory, and they made shirtwaists in this factory. Chris, what's a shirtwaist?
Yeah, so you kind of got to go back to, this is the 1911, and fashion was a little bit different then as it is today. And basically for our ladies during that time period, before the shirtwaist came out, women would be wearing corsets and another fashion thing that was called hoops, and very tight, very, I guess, primitive is what we would say. And so the shirtwaist was like the newest fashion. How every year here we get the latest fall fashion, the latest spring, summer fashion. Well, these were cotton blouses that women started to wear that had no corset. They didn't require any hoops, and it was the new thing. It was the thing everybody wanted. And so what happens is these two individuals, Blank and Harris, found out, oh my gosh, this is the new stuff. So if we can make a bunch of these, we'll make a lot of money. And we have to also kind of keep in mind that that's what was going on during this time too. These individuals were all about making money, and they didn't care how they make money, because Blank and Harris, this was not their first business. This was not their first rodeo when it comes into fashion. And I thought it was funny that, not funny, but the Triangle factory had already been burned in the past. And the reason that it was burned in the past is because what they would do is these guys would start a fire in the factory, let it burn, and they would collect fire insurance, or they would collect the money from the fire insurance policies. They'd build again, a little bit better, a little bit nicer, burn it to the ground, get some more money. So it's a racketeering thing that's going on. This is full of corruption. And to keep the factory, to allow it to burn, Ray, they wouldn't put safety measures in. They wouldn't install sprinklers or, workable fire escapes. So this is a tragedy that could have been prevented, but it is being set in place for it to happen in case these guys need to burn down a building real quick so they can collect some fire insurance money.
Yeah, that's what they were up to. And their previous one, I think it was called the Diamond Waste Company Factory. Also, they also burned it down. I guess, nobody at the time, I guess, well, with political corruption and payoffs, authorities, of course, would look the other way. But the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was, I mean, it was, Chris, I think it was the epitome of a sweatshop. You had these young immigrant women, mostly teenage girls, working these very long hours, like 12, 13-hour days. And they were in this factory. They were all, these long tables, sewing and doing whatever it was they were doing all day long for 12 hours. And I don't know if you mentioned this yet or not, Chris, but you know how much money they got paid a week?
It was like $6.
A little higher than that. They were a little more generous. It was $15 a week. Even in 1911, that wasn't a lot of money.
No. And they had to work 7 days a week. But in addition, they were only given like a 30-minute lunch period. And, you start thinking they were crammed in because, as you've mentioned, this was on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floor of the Ash building. And they had very few working bathrooms. They had faulty ventilation. We didn't have any heat, didn't have any air condition. The stairwells, you could hardly see whether you were going up or down. And we've already mentioned about the fire sprinklers, but Ray, they also only had one fire escape. And just for our listeners who might not be familiar with kind of big city, kind of approach, and fire escapes are those mechanical mechanisms that are put outside of buildings. So if you need to get out in a hurry and the stairwells are blocked, there is a fire escape on the outside of the building that you would climb down. And Ray, with this huge building, there was only one, and there's no way that you would be able to get 150 some people down a fire escape from the 10th floor of a building if there was a working fire.
Yeah, and the staircases inside the building, you mentioned they were dark and they were also very narrow. That was not a workable emergency escape route either. There were 4 elevators in the building, good for them, but only one of them actually worked, and it could only fit about a dozen or so people in it. So, this was a disaster waiting to happen. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And well, the other thing I was going to mention is, what are these people making? They're making clothes, which is fabric, and they're sitting in these tight spaces lined up one by one. So you have all of this fabric that is actually fuel for a fire. Plus they were storing flammable products. They had chemicals there for the production floors. So, basically, if there was one little spark, it would turn into a massive blaze because you had all of the fuel that was needed for a terrible fire. And unfortunately, that's what happens.
Yeah, it was Saturday, March 25, 1911. I want to think it was a nice sunny day there in New York. We don't know what the weather actually was, but it was that Saturday afternoon. There were some 600 women in the factory at that time. And remember, these are teenage girls for the most part. They're immigrants who have moved to the urban city of New York. They're working in these sweatshop conditions, and they're just trying to make a living. 600 of them are in the building when a rag bin catches on fire. And like you said, Chris, everything around that rag bin, including the rag bin, was just kindling for what was going to happen. This was just, it was just ready made for this type of event. The spark that happened was in that rag bin, and they went to try to get the hose, or somebody, a manager or someone, would try to get the hose to put it out. The hose was dry rotted, and it wouldn't work. And so this fire just sort of spreads throughout the floors. You can imagine people panicking, people trying to get out the fire escape. They can't actually, because the door is, I think it was chain shut or bolted or something. So they couldn't get out there. They're trying to get down the stairs. Unfortunately, many of them who try to go down the stairs are burned alive. because they get stuck and trapped. They're trying to get down the elevator. A lot of them end up falling down the elevator shaft. And what is frighteningly reminiscent of 9/11, Chris, is that women are jumping out of the buildings. They're literally, the building in this case, they're literally jumping because just like on 9/11, the fire is so hot, it's either burn to death or jump. That's all there was to it. And there really wasn't, even though the building wasn't, 80, 90, 100 stories high, there really wasn't anything they could do for the people who jumped.
And most of these women, once again, couldn't speak English. They were immigrants. They were scared. They were working in terrible conditions. They had experienced so much oppression from this that when there was a fire, sure, there was a manager that was on the scene, but the manager is basically focused on what can I do for myself, not really focusing on the women that were in there. And these girls become trapped, and yes, the fire department comes and is trying its best to help this, but remember, it's the 8th, 9th, and 10th floor. And the sad thing is that the ladders on the fire trucks only reached 7 floors. So once again, you see people coming to help you, but then you find that they're just not high enough to be able to help. So they go higher to try to escape, but the flames are rising to the top. And they had a life net that was pulled out to allow these ladies to jump, to kind of catch them as they fell. But Ray, there was unfortunately so many women jumping at one time that when they landed in the life safety net on the ground, that it ripped, it tore. The sad thing was also mentioned that so many women were jumping from the building to escape the flames, that they fell on the fire hoses, which then made it extremely difficult to pull the fire hoses into the building to be able to fight the fire. So you have just error after error, tragedy after tragedy. And the really sad thing is that this fire lasted a total of 18 minutes.
Yeah.
And in the 18 minutes, it's over. But it's something that resonates even today and causes whole scale changes needing to be made.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's amazing that in 18 minutes, 144 people were killed, mostly these teenage immigrant women. 2 would die later. So you had a total of 146 workers killed in, like you said, less than 20 minutes. All these people were killed. And Chris, our audience may be interested to know, well, what happened to the owners of the building? Well, they were in the building. They were up on the top floor, and they were able to escape to a neighboring building and got down just fine. But they were charged. And then, of course, despite the evidence against them that they had put these women in bad situation, that this was a dangerous working environment, they were found not guilty. A grand jury failed to indict them on these charges, and so they walked.
Well, they did. However, there is some positive things that does happen as a result of this. Yes, they did not get indicted on manslaughter charges. However, there were lawsuits filed. There were just complete anger. However, they agreed to pay $75 in compensation to each victim's family. But here's the sad thing, Ray. They paid $75 to the family, but yet these guys got $400 per individual for the fire insurance policy they had called out. So even in the midst of this tragedy, they're still making money.
Mm-hmm. I mean, shameless, absolutely shameless. But like you said, there are good things that come about this. You have, this is sort of part of that era called the progressive era. So you have a lot of social changes coming around at this time, and unions for workers, workplace safety, all these things, food and drug safety, are really sort of being pushed to the front burner during this time. So even though it's a tragedy that 146 young women died on that morning, good things did come out of that tragedy.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, let's think about you have individuals during this time. I mean, very high-profile politicians who start advocating for change. You have the New York governor, who's Alfred E. Smith. You also have individuals who are speaking out that were very high up in New York City and in the state of New York. Excuse me. And so you start seeing activists and legislators, they begin creating these laws because there was, I believe I read, over 350,000 people marched in the funeral procession for these victims of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. And they didn't just stop after the funeral, but they advocated, they lobbied. And 3 months later, the governor of New York, who then was, I think, John Dix, he signed a law that was called the Factory Investigating Committee, which, you know, started bringing about more laws as far as fire safety, factory inspection, sanitation, but also employment rules for women and children, because that was the big thing, is that people started to realize what was being done to these women, how they were getting paid significantly less than what they should, how they were being asked to work terrible hours and unspeakable working conditions. And Ray, we even see things today, because it leads to what's known as the Occupational Safety and Health Act. Many people don't know what that is. But if we mention the word OSHA, I guarantee you any business owner or any employee understands very quickly what OSHA is, who really is to ensure that employees are allowed to carry out their work in a condition that is safe.
Yeah. So anytime you go to the drugstore and you buy meat and you don't worry about it, you know, containing all sorts of animal parts, or you go into a building and there's fire exits that you can escape out of. There are there are sprinklers. You can look back to this period in which all that sort of started. All the attention that brought those things about occurred during this period of American history.
This is one of those moments in which anybody who is listening from the state of North Carolina, when you go into an elevator that is in the state of North Carolina, we always made fun, because you would walk in and you would see Sherry Berry's picture right there. She's always there, the labor.
She's not there anymore.
Secretary of Labor, but she's no longer there. And so there's some guy there nobody pays about. But everybody always would point to, there she is. And the reason she is there is, Sherry Berry's there. But what Sherry Berry reminded us is that this elevator is safe. This building is safe. Everything has been done to a strict regiment, so to prevent people from experiencing what took place in 1911.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Chris, thank you for another great episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I hope our listeners enjoyed this episode. We ask you to share this episode with your family and friends. Until next time, I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
We'll talk to you later.